Welcome to Moneyweb at Midday, the actuality news show, offering unique insights and in-depth analysis, featuring South Africa's top business leaders, newsmakers, and analysts for today's professionals. Your host, Jeremy Maggs.
Hello, and once again, thank you for listening to Moneyweb at Midday. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to put a little context around the numbers, some perspective around the politics, some clarity around the choices facing us in South Africa. A warm welcome. I'm Jeremy Maggs. Coming up on the program today, the Post Office is fighting for survival and relevance in a digital economy. I'll be talking to the Acting Chief Executive Officer in just a moment. After 18 years of delay, South Africa may finally be ready to fix electricity pricing. Fresh signals about how South Africa plans to build its next growth chapter. And Rooibos is already a global success, but South Africa may be leaving billions in value on the table. It's Thursday, the 27th of August. The South African Post Office says it's finally moving out of business rescue and towards becoming a sustainable public enterprise. And this is obviously after years of financial distress, heavy losses and shrinking operations. But while its balance sheet has improved, cash flow remains under pressure, more government funding may still be needed, and questions also remain about whether a turnaround can survive without continued state support. Joining us now is the Acting Chief Executive of the SA Post Office, Fatima Gane. Thank you very much indeed. Do you think the Post Office is genuinely saved, or has business rescue just bought you more time?
So I think we need to step back in terms of what is the objectives of the business rescuer, and so, they work within a defined framework of the Companies Act, and it's really to reset the business in readiness. And so when you tick the criteria against the criteria, what is the objectives of what they set out to do, those have certainly been achieved. And it's about now being positioned to take the business forward. So can it be saved? Yes, I'm here and I'm saying it can. Differently though, we keep benchmarking ourselves to the prior periods. So a very different version of a post office, but that would require still, capital injection, and whether it's from the fiscus or, SAPO raising itself on its balance sheet or through a partnership. But it's not out of the woods in terms of, a break even or even profitability. That's not what the business rescuers have achieved. They have right-sized the business. They have reset the balance sheet in readiness for the next phase of the business.
I want to talk to you about what that different version of the Post Office is going to look like. But you do have an unqualified audit, but the Auditor General is still questioning the Post Office's ability to continue as a going concern. Difficult to reconcile, surely, those 2 points of view.
Coming through the ranks of, the auditing profession, the unqualified opinion is a very big win for us because it puts credibility for the numbers at a period in time, which is the year end. So those numbers that are now signed off on, you can place reliance on them. And what does that mean? It means you're in a state of readiness to, onboard a partner who's going to conduct a due diligence on you. So in the conduct of the due diligence, they can look at our balance sheet, they can look at our operations and say, okay, I can place reliance on these numbers. It's been signed off by the highest service assurance provider in the country. Similarly, if you take our balance sheet and we get PFMA approvals, and we go to banks and try to raise funding on the balance sheet, banks can place reliance on what we are giving them because there's now credibility. So at a point in time, that unqualified opinion makes a big difference. The going forward and looking at the going concern, that emphasis of matter is really looking to the forward and saying, okay, here we could have an issue because, again, the business is not breaking even. There will be a point where cash, which is a finite resource, is going to run out. And if our partnerships or if our revenue diversification projects don't take off at the speed that's required, then we would be looking to the fiscus and saying we need some working capital to keep us at abeyance while this materializes.
And that's a difficult one to justify to taxpayers who might want to say, why should we put more money into the post office after business rescue?
Why you should is because the social mandate has never gone away. So the reason why we exist today is because, and it was worth putting the business into rescue and not liquidating it at the time of provisional liquidation, is because there is a social mandate that the post office still holds and needs to execute on. Now, the relevance of the social mandate is probably is declining because mail in its traditional form is a declining mail business. But it's still relevant for our South Africa and its people because not everybody has connectivity to emails and to be able to receive electronic communication. And so there's a huge dependency, particularly in the areas that are not urbanized, for the mailman. And our business model is really twofold. It's the mailman, and then it's what we call last mile, and then it's our branches. And a lot of times we are benchmarked on the branches, and so the last mile and the mail business is, it's forgotten.
I want to talk to you a little bit about that different version. If I've read the data correctly, well over 4,000 jobs have gone, branches have been cut. Fatima, how much smaller must the post office become before the numbers actually start to work? In other words, what is that different version going to look like down the line?
The version of Fatima is that it can't be cut any further. Then it's not relevant. In order to meet that social mandate, the number that we have today, which is, after the Section 189 job losses and after the branch rationalization, that is the tipping point of I need to be in existence for this. And now it's about how do you build on it and diversify, because you're going to need commercial activities to supplement the social mandate, which is why you are relevant and why you exist. So it's complex and not a perfect science, but you can only build from the number of employees that you have, and you can only build from the number of branches that you have. Reducing it makes, it's pointless reducing it, because at where we're sitting today is we have a national address database and we have a reach, and that is the reason why we deliver on the social mandate. And that's not gone away.
What would you say to private courier companies, Fatima, that argue the post office is being kept alive by the state while they have to compete without that safety net?
Because the private courier companies, and we've seen this, we went to market for private-public partnerships, in December. And what we've seen, and including over and above that, we've had unsolicited companies coming to us, which we are busy with. It's a work stream for us on how we onboard. Is that the private players are good in the urban areas, and where the post office has value for them is in the rural areas, because we have the footprint and the reach. And so it could complement and be a very good marriage between the state as well as these private entities in terms of delivering a holistic courier services to South Africans, because their value proposition is more dense in your cities, and we have the ability in rural areas. And, that should be the value proposition and the win-win between both entities.
And to that point, you have received, as I understand it, strong interest from potential partners, but you'll agree with me that interest is not revenue. At this point, as we have this conversation, how much of the turnaround is still only a plan?
A significant amount of the turnaround is a plan, because we are coming out of business rescue. And so it's about how do you get the plan in motion. And while we have work streams and there are some activities which have taken off the ground, they're not the activities that's going to move the needle. So, bringing on RTO with motor vehicle licensing, or bringing on the new lotteries operator with the, those are good, initiatives. However, what's going to move the needle is onboarding a significant partner that complements or supplements our business. Now, they would have their process and we have our process. And you said you're absolutely correct in saying, yes, we've gone to market. We've had surprisingly very good traction. We now have a framework with a transaction advisor on how to onboard the partners. And so the next point is, after a request for information, we're now going to draft requests for proposals and make it tangible. We're still a state-owned entity, so we have to comply with Public Finance Management Act. And so, these are the things that probably take longer, but you're doing it in the manner that you should be doing it. And so, yes, it's taking longer. And while we're speaking, the post office is still in motion, and so you're still burning working capital, which brings me to, yes, that's where we are in terms of the auditor being concerned that, going concern is an emphasis, something they would like to emphasize on.
Just a final question. Assets now exceed liabilities. That's a good thing, but cash, as you've outlined to me, does remain under pressure. How close are you to another liquidity crisis?
We have applied to government on our MTF funding. I know it's being deliberated on because I worked on it, further supplementary information. So we're very dependent on that. Or we'd be having a different conversation if that didn't materialize.
I'm going to leave it there. Acting Chief Executive Officer of the South African Post Office, Fatima Gane, thank you indeed. The headlines tell you what's happening, but do you know what it means for your money? Join Moneyweb editor Ryk van Niekerk in conversation with National Treasury Director General Dr. Duncan Pieterse and Gina Skuman, head of City Research South Africa, as they explain the economic forces shaping South Africa's future and your financial future. Tuesday, the 1st of September at the Sandton Convention Centre. Register for free using the promo code MONEYWEB. Moneyweb Summit in partnership with Moneyweb, the conversations that move markets and your money.
Moneyweb at midday, for all your up-to-date stories.
South Africa, I read, is redesigning the way electricity is priced as Eskom's dominance gives way to private generators, traders, and a more competitive power market. But I guess the biggest test is whether government and the regulator can finally implement reforms that have been on the table, if I'm not mistaken, since 2008. I'm going to talk now to Dion Conradi, who's an independent electricity pricing specialist. Dion, welcome to you. So is this genuinely an electricity pricing reset, or do you think we're simply repackaging reforms that government failed to implement 18 years ago?
Thank you, Jeremy. I can start this way to say the policy that was developed in 2008, that's so long ago. So the industry that it was designed for has actually changed completely from the one that we have now. So I think in the meantime, Eskom is busy with unbundling. You've got the independent transmission company, IPPs. So the whole electricity market moving towards a competitive environment. The framework need to change to make provision for that, because clearly it's not in place. So it is important that it needs to be done. But I think just to answer you, it's very important. There are three things: cost, price, and affordability. So making tariffs cost reflective is very important. But you must remember, it doesn't automatically make electricity affordable or cheaper. If the underlying cost is high, which we see with Eskom, you can have a perfect cost reflective tariff, which consumers still can't afford. So the real test is actually to reduce the underlying cost. And that is, if you look at, I just want to say the last thing is, one of the important qualifications I want to say is, many of these principles in the new policy are not actually new. It is just the cost reflectivity, transparency, proper cost allocation were all in it. The real failure was in the implementation of that.
Government says tariffs need to become more cost reflective. Does that cost reflective then mean that consumers down the line should prepare to pay more and not less?
It's not necessarily true, because because municipalities is a different kettle of fish, because not all of them are supposed to have cost reflective tariffs, but they also have that major financial contribution to the rates, which they make, which is actually a subsidy from there. But I would say South Africa, especially the Eskom tariffs, is substantially cost reflective at the moment. They for many years have been unbundled, and I think the significant change here is to make the cost-effective pricing principle now make it complete for the whole chain, including, and I'm talking specifically municipalities, but also the interface between generators. So if you ask, are they going to pay more? Some customers are paying more, some will pay less, because I think you've seen it already that some of the network charges are now becoming higher because they were always sort of subsidized and in the average tariff. But now with competition coming in, it started to become very important to unbundle it and make it cost effective. So yeah, definitely it doesn't mean cheaper tariffs. It could mean for some customers higher tariffs.
Let's talk about unbundling a little further in a moment. But as I listen to you, it seems to me that municipal tariffs are the essential problem here. And I think you said or alluded to the fact that some municipalities are effectively using electricity customers to subsidize failures elsewhere in their budgets. That can't go on.
Absolutely. And from my personal opinion, as municipalities could be one of the biggest tests in this whole process. And it could, if the policy is implemented in the right way, I think that could be one of the most consequential aspects of this policy. But the problem is, government proposes simple recovery, inefficiency, excessive losses, non-payment of the poor. So I conceptually, I support that principle and the policy there. But the question here again is major implementation. They depend heavily on electricity to cross-subsidize other municipal services. It differs from one place to the other. I don't say they must lose it, but that's a financial issue here, so a flow of finances. So if they still need that money, then they must get it from the fiscus rather than contaminate it in the electricity industry. Otherwise, there's problems. Because if that's not sorted, this industry can't be sustainable.
So it's all about effective implementation. If we go back to 2008, you say there was no accountability at that point for implementation. Why should we believe this time is going to be different, do you think?
We absolutely will need a political will to make the difference and make the changes. And I don't think we have actually an option to do that. And we will have to sit back. This policy on its own is not the solution. Because out of that identified certain areas, already said municipal debt, how do you reduce the structural cost in the industry? We will need to have some work teams to find out and try to reduce the causes of the cost of electricity and understand that. Because if you, just lessons from 2008, a policy is only as good as who is responsible for implementing it, what the deadlines are, what NERSA must do, what Eskom must do, what municipalities must do, and then most important, how non-compliance is dealt with. And then ultimately, who is the single accountable person that must make this happen? Otherwise, we're going to sit with the same issue.
Dion, I want to go back to the framework if we can. Assuming the tariffs are properly unbundled, am I correct in saying that consumers then would be able to see exactly how much is generational cost and how much, as we've alluded to earlier, is simply a municipal markup?
Especially if you can get proper unbundling and it's transparently shown. That will definitely happen. So then you can start to put pressure on certain areas. But currently, especially in the municipalities, the cross subsidies in their tariffs are really hidden. Eskom has put an effort in to make it transparent, and they're moving in, and they've done a lot of work to do that. But I think you'll definitely, if you do that, you could then start to put pressure and actually tackle the underlying principles of why the costs are so high from a basis perspective.
And all, of course, predicated on the fact that this is properly monitored. You've questioned NERSA, the regulator's capacity to police the system. Do you think, bluntly, the regulator is capable then of overseeing more than 200 municipalities in this changing electricity market that you alluded to at the beginning of our conversation?
Yeah. Now, I must, with you there, fully agree. NERSA, if you think about it, Eskom on its own takes a huge amount of resources to go through the cost of supply studies to make sure that everything happens. There are 170-odd municipalities. All their cost of supply studies need to be analysed properly and looked and checked out and looked for transparency. So my personal opinion is, I think NERSA, you can't blame them. All the blame on them, I don't think they're not resourced enough, and they are almost always catching up and not getting ahead in terms of where we're going with market. And you see that because a lot of the market development, although you do it eventually with the rules and it's with NERSA, but it's almost, my feeling is they're always trying to catch up. And while it's the private people that start to push for the rules and the regulations.
Dion, I'm going to need a very quick answer to this because time is against us. Government also wants a 10-year electricity price outlook. How credible can a decade-long forecast possibly be when, as you've also told me, demand generation and the market itself is changing so quickly?
I'm going to just give an example. We had an MYPD3. There was a five-year forecast. During that, in the second year of that 5 year, the whole ferroalloy markets fell through the bottom. And the sales dropped immensely because you can imagine the biggest amount of sales that Eskom had is from those areas. And that bit Eskom because they just fell behind in terms of revenue and they still had the high cost to pay. I mean, just a simple thing. Look what happened now with Trump coming in, with the war in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Those type of things that impact the economy will have a major impact on. So the 10-year is a nice commitment and I like the idea, but it's not a guarantee.
Dion Conradi, thank you very much indeed. You are an independent electricity pricing specialist. Thank you for your insight.
You're listening to Moneyweb at Midday.
Now, this week, the Investment and Infrastructure Office within the Presidency hosting the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium South Africa in Cape Town. It's in its 5th edition, and the event bringing together over 1,000 local and foreign delegates, government ministers, high-level representatives from lending institutions and the private sector, all convening to learn of progress in implementing this country's so-called BUILD program, and also to gain insight into new projects that have entered the development pipeline. With local government elections to be held in early November, it was opportune that the symposium convened under the banner Shaping the Future of Municipal Infrastructure. Attending the symposium, Andrew Maggs of Africa Mining Watch. So, Andrew, first of all then, the symposium addressed by President Ramaphosa. What was his key message?
Jeremy, President Ramaphosa highlighted infrastructure investment as the backbone of South Africa's growth strategy, telling delegates that the national project pipeline is now valued at over 1.67 trillion rand. He stressed the need to turn plans into bankable projects, improve coordination, and accelerate delivery to unlock jobs and promote inclusive growth. He made reference to this month's SADC summit in Durban, stressing that infrastructure is fundamental to Southern African and continental integration, and that investment in cross-border networks, roads, bridges, rail, port, pipelines, data cables, etc., are needed to connect economies. And as the newly elected chairperson of SADC, it will be interesting to see if we can accelerate this agenda.
You used the phrase bankable projects. The event also seeing Dean McPherson, he's the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, launching the 3rd edition of the construction book, which, as I understand, lists projects across the public sector that are expected to enter the market over the next 12 to 18 months. Now, the book provides insight into government ambitions and priorities, but Andrew, I imagine the value of the book will increasingly be measured by what happens after publication. In other words, how many of those projects actually go into implementation?
Jeremy, indeed, the book provides contractors and consultants, financiers and other professional service providers with a clear indication of the opportunities that lie ahead. So in that sense, it's an invaluable planning tool, particularly in terms of providing companies looking to participate in these projects with adequate lead time to mobilize resources. But more importantly, it's a working document that allows progress of the project pipeline to be measured. And for the first time since its launch, quarterly updates will now be provided to monitor the progress of individual projects as they move through the project cycle. Procurement milestones will be tracked, tenders issued, tender awards, construction commencement, and material changes to project timelines should they arise. This year's edition lists 110 projects across 6 infrastructure sectors with a combined value of some 395 billion rand. It also has a national geographic spread. Municipal infrastructure is the largest sector in the book by value, comprising 10 projects valued at approximately 112 billion rand. This expanded municipal focus is important given the central role of local government in providing water, sanitation, roads, electricity, and other infrastructure that enables communities and local economies to function. And Jeremy, for most citizens, this is where the greatest impact of new infrastructure is felt, at the local level. Investment is also earmarked for transport projects, 81 billion, The majority of the 29 transport projects put forward belong to SANRAL, our National Roads Authority. Energy projects, 86 billion rand, mostly belonging to Eskom. Social infrastructure projects, think of roads, rather schools, clinics, hospitals, etc., and that'll account for 51 billion. Water projects, 35 billion. And a new addition to the book is digital infrastructure. 3 large digital infrastructure projects valued at some 28 billion are included. And may I add, for the first time, public-private partnership projects, PPPs, have been included, and this reflects the increasing importance of alternative procurement and financing approaches as government seeks to crowd in private sector capital, expertise and operating capability.
So, Andrew, lots of ambition and some very big numbers, but are there specific projects perhaps that might deserve a mention?
Yes, and these would all be recognized as priorities. The Cape Flats Aquifer Recharge Program, particularly relevant given the Western Cape's vulnerability to drought. The Bike Bridge Messina Water Transfer Scheme in Limpopo. Construction of a 100 megawatt solar farm in the Kruger Special Economic Zone in the Eastern Cape. The Durban-Johannesburg Container Corridor Project, particularly important for exporters and importers based in Gauteng to expedite the movement of containerized goods. And the National Rail Corridor Project, which is intended to be implemented as a PPP.
So you've outlined key sectors and priority projects, all well and good, but perhaps the most important question is, how does government intend funding the rollout? Where is the money going to come from?
Well, Jeremy, the National Treasury has approved an infrastructure budget of just over 1 trillion rand for a 3-year period starting 2026-27. So the infrastructure rollout will be through a mix of public spending, state-owned company investment, provincial and municipal budgets, and expanded public-private partnerships, PPPs. Also, and this is particularly important, a new credit guarantee vehicle is being set up with the World Bank and other development partners to mobilize private capital.
And just a final question. These are all large and very complex projects. I imagine they've required huge effort and time in terms of planning. Frequently, though, it's in the planning phase that many projects fall by the wayside and never actually reach so-called bankability because of poor or inadequate preparation. Is this recognized as a major constraint? Was it under discussion? And if so, how is it being discussed?
Jeremy, very much so. On the sidelines of the symposium, I spoke to Mametse Masimola, Head of Infrastructure South Africa, which serves as a single point of entry for infrastructure planning, management, and delivery in this country, and is mandated to expedite bankable project preparation. She regards inadequate project preparation as the single biggest constraint to rolling out new infrastructure projects in this country. And remember, from a lender's and investor's perspective, risks need to be identified and mitigated during the preparation phase. The funding might be there, but unless you can de-risk projects, capital will not be forthcoming. She also spoke of the importance of scoping and pricing projects correctly to ensure bids received to build, for example, a road, pipeline, power plant. Those bids are realistic and reflect fair value. The provision of targeted technical assistance by Infrastructure South Africa to local municipalities who frequently lack the capacity and skills to prepare projects is therefore critical.
Andrew Maggs from Africa Mining Watch, thank you very much.
Moneyweb at midday for all your up-to-date stories.
I want to share some staggering numbers with you. South Africa is selling the equivalent of more than 10 billion cups of Rooibos last year, with exports topping 10,000 tons for the very first time. That is impressive, but I think the bigger question is whether enough of the money actually stays in South Africa. Let's explore that in a little more detail. Davy de Villiers is director of the South African Rooibos Council. Davy, welcome to you. Are we making enough money for Rooibos, or are we still largely exporting a raw commodity and allowing other parties to capture the real value?
Jeremy, yes. It is concerning that, firstly, it is very gratifying that there's so much Rooibos being exported and that we are seeing a general upward trend in most markets. It is obviously, it begs the question why we're not adding more value locally. And for sure, it's definitely a huge opportunity to create a lot more jobs, opportunities to work, and research opportunities, innovation ideas within the country. It's an ecosystem that's just waiting to burst open. We find one of the stumbling blocks is that the Rooibos is traditionally carried in brands, and those brands generally are packed in the destination market. So when we're talking traditional tea bags, those tend to be exported. The raw material for those gets exported in bulk and then packed in those markets, obviously because of transport efficiencies. We also find that the clients want to blend possibly, and we don't have all those components available to blend and pack locally. So that is something that also needs attention. Certainly something that presents an opportunity for the future in the agricultural space as well.
So you talk about opportunities for the future, and obviously beneficiation is critical. I guess we've got to ask why the industry hasn't moved quicker in that respect into extracts, blending, cosmetics, functional foods, finished products. Is it a difficult hurdle to overcome?
Well, Jeremy, I think it's a slow burn type thing. We've got to educate our destination markets that we have great capability within the country. We've got fantastic laboratories and research institutions and the creativity from food technicians to make these products. So we are up against traditional markets like Germany, for instance, where they do all of this and they carry the benefit of having done it for many years and being leaders in that. So it's really, South Africa needs to establish itself as a very capable supplier of these beneficiated products.
Have you crunched the numbers, Davy? In other words, when Rooibos leaves South Africa in whatever form, how much more valuable does it become once someone overseas packages, brands and processes it?
Jeremy, it depends on what formats we're talking about, but a good indicator of that is, and I'm just going to refer to the stats that I do know, domestic market, a tea bag here on shelf. The actual Rooibos raw material value in that product on shelf is less than 30%, probably closer to 25%. So through the chain, value has been added in the form of filter paper and packaging, transport and all of those things. So if you can imagine doing the same thing for an export market, which is now bigger than the South African market by probably about 20%, there's a lot of scope to add value just in tea bag format. But when you start thinking about other forms of innovation, so not just pure product innovation, but where we place the product, so market innovation, coffee chains, for instance, that opens up a whole new value chain. And coffee is generally sold, it's a much more expensive product than Rooibos. So the prices that you see on the board when you walk into a coffee shop, they're a lot higher than Rooibos. And that's just there's no packaging really involved in that. It's a bulk product that's been delivered to that coffee outlet, and same with Rooibos. So obviously, we'd like to access those value chains and establish Rooibos in the coffee chains. It's counterintuitive as that might sound.
So if you want to access other value chains, surely the industry then should be setting a specific target of how much Rooibos is converted into higher value products before it leaves the country.
Jeremy, that's something that falls outside the role of the South African Rooibos Council. I'm talking with the Rooibos Council hat on now. Our role at the Rooibos Council really is to create the enabling environment to support innovation and build that demand for Rooibos, and that we do through a whole bunch of mechanisms, including funding research and interacting with also other ecosystems. But the actual innovation, that comes from the commercial side, the guys who own brands and the guys who own processing factories.
All right, let's pivot the conversation. You also identified tourism as another opportunity. Why do you think the Cederberg, already synonymous with Rooibos, is not perhaps exploiting that opportunity with a little more enthusiasm?
It is to a degree, Jeremy, that, a lot of the Rooibos farms have accommodation on them. And of course, there are all these magnificent things to go and see in the Cederberg that are marketed. But there is nothing that kind of bonds the whole lot together. And Rooibos would be the ideal vehicle because it spans a pretty large geographical area, about 350 kilometers north to south, and then about roughly 100 kilometers east to west. So it's quite a big strip that would cover a lot of these farms. It covers a lot of the interesting things to go and see in the Cederberg, rock paintings, rock formations. And so there is an opportunity to bond that all together. It's not something that we have paid that much attention to yet, but it's definitely on our radar now to start working on that. And of course, we've got the experience here in the Western Cape as well. There's all these different wine routes, so we can learn from them. We've got good support from various institutions, including the Western Cape government, who are very keen to get this thing going. So I think the answer there is it's not really that prominent yet, Rooibos tourism, but watch the space.
David de Villiers, I'm going to leave it there, Director at the South African Rooibos Council. Appreciate your time. Thank you. And on that note, I'm going to bid you farewell. You've been listening to Moneyweb at midday. We are here every weekday at noon with the latest in current affairs, the economy and policy. You can always catch the podcast version a little later. Thank you for making us part of your day. Until next time, goodbye.
Listen to the daily live stream of Moneyweb at midday or download episodes on moneyweb.co.za, the Moneyweb app, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or follow Moneyweb News on social media for more updates. Moneyweb, your trusted source for business and investment insights.